Hospitals. Tens of thousands of them are present in our world today. They are symbols of our health, staffed with the most brilliant minds, housing the most modern equipment, and treating the sick with any and all ailments. The hospital, however, has not always existed. It took thousands of years of civilization, the death of Christ, and the determination of a sickly bishop named Basil. The hospital began in Caesarea, Turkey, 4th century AD. Prior to the creation of the first hospital, two precursors belonging to the ancient worlds existed, one in Greece and one in Rome. In ancient Greece, Asclepion temples were the earliest resemblance of what a hospital may look like. These temples were devoted to Asclepius, the god of healing. Sick individuals would come and ask to be healed by the sorcerers of the temple. Sacrifices and prayers would be offered up to the gods in return for healing. They did not take terminally ill patients, as they believed that dying in these temples was unpure. They also required payments or donations, thereby excluding the poor. In Rome, veleudinarias were the precursors to hospitals. These were facilities where wounded slaves or soldiers would come to heal and rest before being able to go out to work or fight once more. They were funded by legions or wealthy slave owners and were not charitable at all in nature. Both of these societies would fail to develop a concern for the poor. This concern would only develop when the Roman Empire became Christian. This transition from a pagan to a Christian empire would occur just before the birth of Saint Basil of Caesarea, also known as Saint Basil the Great. Saint Basil was born to an aristocratic family in 329 AD, Caesarea, Turkey. He received a degree in literary education and had the expressed intention of following in his father's footsteps and becoming a lawyer. He was, however, persuaded by his sister, who eventually became a nun, to join the ascetic lifestyle, devoting his life to God. First entering the priesthood and then becoming the bishop of Caesarea, Basil made his name and career staunchly opposing Arianism, the heretical belief that denied the divinity of Christ. Although this defined his political career, his foundation of the first hospital is what made him the patron saint to hospital administrators and reformers. The first Christian hospital and the rise of the modern hospital started out as a soup kitchen in 369 AD in response to a famine that was hitting the region. In order to generate the funds needed to buy the food in order to run the kitchen, Basil fought, hunted, and screamed at the rich in order for them to donate their money, arguing it wasn't Christian at all to hoard their wealth and that it should instead be used to help the poor. This soup kitchen was then expanded upon with a greater vision to treat the sick, not just to feed them, forming the first hospital in 373 AD. It housed lepers, travelers, strangers, orphans, and the sick. It was staffed by clergy and professional physicians and was funded by donations from the rich. The hospital not only cared for these individuals, but it also taught some of them, primarily the orphans, various trades and other marketable skills. The most ambitious of the buildings in the hospital complex, and possibly the best representation of what it meant to care for all, was the quarantine wing for lepers. The lepers were the outcasts of society, shunned and neglected from everything they once knew. They had no family, they had no friends, they had nobody. Although there was no known cure for leprosy, Saint Basil took it upon himself to care for these people. He himself would enter the wing wrapped in cloth and go out to bathe and embrace the lepers. He did not cure leprosy, but he rather gave these individuals the respect and dignity they rightfully deserved. In order to fulfill his vision of creating this hospital, Saint Basil needed to fight many doubters and many obstacles. He first needed to convince the greater Christian community that medicine was not heresy. After this, he would need to prove that his project was indeed feasible and doable. His first job was to convince his Christian brethren that medicine was not heresy. At the time, medicine was seen as secular and the creation of the unbelievers. Basil, however, reasoned that to every disease that we encounter, God has given us a plant or an herb that will cure that ailment. His writings and sermons eventually won over the community, and they no longer considered medicine to be pure heresy. After convincing them that medicine was a Christian cause to pursue, he then needed to prove to the emperor and his other doubters that creating the hospital was indeed a feasible project to undertake. By gathering the necessary funding and showing that the poor can indeed be taken care of and that they should be taken care of, hospitals throughout the Byzantine Empire started to appear. Saint Basil died on January 1st, 379 AD, at 49 years old. His existence had been plagued with numerous diseases and ailments, which he ignored and neglected in order to provide for and care for others. Within a century after his death, hospitals became common throughout the empire, and they were a distinctly Christian institution. By his death, Saint Basil had managed to show the world how to care for the poor through the use of medical advances, compassion, and outright bravery. To embrace medicine, to prioritize the poor, and to encourage charity were all important and essential pieces that led to the creation of the first hospital. Saint Basil was the first individual to push back against the status quo and to care for the poor and prioritize them when nobody else would. Saint Gregory of Nazianzus, the longtime friend of Saint Basil, gave the eulogy at his funeral. He remarked on Basil's ascetic lifestyle and his devotion to the poor. In his own words, he said, "Others have had their cooks and splendid tables, and the devices and dainties of confectioners and exquisite carriages, and soft flowing robes. Basil's care was for the sick, and the relief of their wounds, and the imitation of Christ, by cleansing leprosy, not by word, but in deed." Let us follow St. Basil's example, and cure the sick not in words, but in deeds.